Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Om Swastiastu. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Bincang Bahari, Webinar Series 9, Institute for Marine Research and Observation. The topic of this webinar is Mangrove Restoration in the Changing Climate. This webinar also live from our YouTube channel at Bepol KKP. All of you also can stay connected with us on our social media, Facebook and Instagram at Bepol KKP, and our Twitter at @riset_prancak. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we start, let's pray to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Because of His blessing and grace, we can join this virtual event today. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcoming the Honorable Dr. Inyoman Radiarta, MSc, Head of Marine Research Center, Ministry of Marine Affairs. Good afternoon, Dr. Nyoman. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good afternoon. Makasih, Mbak.
Well, thank you, Dr. Nyoman. The Honorable Dr. Teja Arifibala, MSc, Head of Institute for Marine Research and Observation. Good afternoon, Dr. Teja. How are you today, sir? Well, in this webinar, we have 4 special speakers, and our speakers is from all around the world. Now, I would like to welcoming the first speaker is Dr. Ahmad Aldri Amir. He is senior lecturer from Institute for Environment and Development, Lestari, University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Good afternoon, Dr. Aldri. How are you today, sir?
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you for having me and all of us here. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. And our second speaker is Dr. Yaya Ihya Ulumuddin, SSI, MSc. He's from Research Group for Bioecology of Marine Vegetation Research Center for Oceanography, Indonesia Institute of Science. Good afternoon, Dr. Yaya. How are you today, sir?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our third speaker, Mr. Daniel Fries, PhD. He is from Associate Professor, Department of Geography from National University of Singapore. Good afternoon, Sir Dan. Good afternoon. Oh, well, Mr.
Good afternoon, and great to see everyone. Sir? I'm great, thank you. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And our fourth speaker is Mr. Severino J. Salmo, PhD from Associate Professor, Institute of Biology, College of Science from University of the Philippines. And Mr. Severino will be joined with us in a minute. And last but not least, we have our moderator, Mrs. Frida Sidik, PhD. She is researcher of Institute for Marine Research and Observation. Good afternoon, Mrs. Frida.
Good afternoon, Juan.
How are you today, Miss?
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we will hear the opening speech from Head of Marine Research Center, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, to Dr. Inyoman Radiarta, MSc. Time is yours.
Thank you, Bulan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Very good afternoon for everybody. Honorable Head of Institute for Marine Research and Observation, Dr. Teja Arifibala, honorable speakers. I think this webinar, we have various speakers from a different country and also different specific topic. First is Dr. Yaya Ihya Ulumuddin, Mangrove Research Associate, Research Center for Oceanography, Indonesian of Science, Indonesia. And then Dr. Daniel, Associate Professor, Department of Geography, National University of Singapore. Dr. Severino Gesalmo, Associate Professor, Institute of Biology, College of Science, University of Philippines, and Dr. Ahmad Aldir Amir, Senior Lecturer, Institute of Environment and Development, University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Thank you so much for your appreciation and spending time with our webinar this afternoon. And of course, our enlightening moderator, Dr. Frida Siddiq, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Marine Research Center, I would like to express my gratitude to present of all speakers and participants in the Binjang Bahari 9s with the topic of mangrove restoration in changing climates. I think I have 3 slides. Can I show my slide? No.
Yes, please, Dr. Nyoman.
Okay, I think we all know that observed regional impact on climate change on the ocean. One of the ecosystem, mangrove ecosystem, is very much impacting on that change of the climate to the ecosystem, as well as on the physical characteristic of the ocean. So from this current study published by the IPCC in 2019, we can see how that's a level of impact of climate change to the ecosystem. So again, we know that the mangrove ecosystem, one of the source for blue carbon. That's this is a very important coastal ecosystem as the contribute for the tourism and also for the food security and secure livelihood, climate change mitigations, and also water quality and climate change adaptation of coastal protections. Based on our study, this indicate how that carbon sequestration or carbon stock in the mangrove ecosystem combined between the study done by LIPI and also by the KKP. So the green color indicate that study done by KKP, while that's yellow color indicate the study by LIPI. So this indicate how important mangrove to that to prevent the climate change in the coastal ecosystem. So to highlight that issue, I think that to highlight that issue, today webinar that's held by the Institute of Marine Research and Observation with aiming to enhance understanding of the best mangrove management practice based on research progress and lesson learned, and also gain the recommendation on the innovative mangrove restoration that can increase coastal resilience. So I sincerely wish that this international webinar will great success, and not only to share knowledge among the speaker, but also share the experience in mangrove restoration at the beginning of the cooperation, and also beginning of our cooperation to contribute and strengthening the network of ASEAN mangrove researcher. With increased climate change concern, it is important to adjust restoration effort to incorporate climate into decision making, incorporate uncertainty into restoration planning and design by planning for multiple climate scenarios, and assure that target area will be sustainable under future condition. I think from a perspective of various speaker from various different country, especially in the Asian country, sharing your knowledge, your experience, how to restore the mangrove, how to deal with the mangrove ecosystem, that will be beneficial from all of the audience, all the participants in this webinar. So I thank you very much for your participation, and with the grace of God Almighty, I proudly and officially open this webinar. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Dr. Nyoman, for your time. And now we will hear the greeting remarks from Head of Institute for Marine Research and Observation. To Dr. Teja Arifibala, time is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. It's a pleasure here to be. It is a pleasure to be here. First, I would like to thank to Dr. Inyoman Radiarta, Director of Marine Research Center, Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of Indonesia, for providing us a positive spirit to continuously preserve sustainability of mangrove ecosystem. I would like also to extend thanks to the chair, Dr. Frida Siddiq, who actively initiate this webinar. And I believe this session can be held because of her wide range of network in mangrove research work. On behalf of Institute of Marine Research and Observation, I would like to express our gratitude to the expert speaker, Dr. Ahmad Aldri Amir, Dr. Yahya Iya Ulumuddin, Dr. Dan Fries, and Dr. Severino Salmo for their willingness to share knowledge, expertise, and effort for preserving sustainability of mangrove ecosystem in Southeast Asia countries. My special thanks also go to the webinar committee for preparing this great event and to participants for attending virtually this event. Mangrove play important role in climate change mitigation as they serve as significant carbon sink known as blue carbon ecosystem. On the other hand, as sea level rise is predicted to continue rise and bring this coastal forest at risk, therefore, on the ground, climate change mitigation and adaptation activities in mangrove can be done simultaneously. To preserve mangrove ecosystem, a national program related to mangrove restoration has been launched by Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of Indonesia. This program has target to achieve 200 hectare mangrove restoration area this year, with the total target of 1,800 hectare by year 2024. The Institute of Marine Research and Observation, as the research unit under coordination of the ministry, has the mandate to support the program through research and observation. Related to mangrove restoration, there were shrimp ponds surrounding our office that had been idle for some time. Since mid-2000, IMRO team led by Dr. Frida has started to restore mangrove ecosystem around IMRO office. These restoration efforts generate a green environment in the office during the last decade. The mangrove restoration in the local scale actually also provide added value of reducing climate risk in the global scale. However, this climate resilient benefit can be achieved by preserving and monitoring continuously health of mangrove forests. In the current digital technology era, mangrove health can be monitored through an application like mangrove collection and analysis data, or MACADA, that is developed by the Indonesian Institute of Science. Another approach is develop an index like Mangrove Health Index. Maybe Dr. Yahya will enlighten us on the topic. Hopefully, through this webinar, we can exchange ideas and raise awareness about monitoring mangrove health. We also hope that today's webinar will also deliver knowledge about role and importance of mangrove forests, not only for scientists, but also to wider audience, hoping to get broader and long impact of our mangrove program. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi.
Thank you, Dr. Teja Arifibala. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we move to the next agenda, I would like to share the rules of this webinar. The first one, we will mute all the audio of the participant and we will open the discussion section after all the speakers finish deliver their presentation. And we will provide for all of you who will ask the question on Zoom application can ask your question on room chat, raise hand feature, and also column Q&A. And for all of you who join us on YouTube channel can ask the question from the room chat. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we also share link. All of you have to attend until finish this webinar because in the end of this webinar, our team will share the link of electronic certificate and also material the presentation. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we reach to the main agenda that we've been waiting for. And the next agenda will lead by our moderator, Mrs. Frida Sidik, PhD, talking about their education. She got her bachelor degree from University of Sydney and got her master degree from University of Warwick and got her PhD from University of Queensland. And now Mrs. Frida Sidik is researcher of Institute for Marine Research and Observation. To Mrs. Frida, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Land. Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to INRO webinar. So maybe one of you would like to ask, what is Binjang Bahari? Binjang Bahari is ocean talk. So our topic today is about mangrove restoration in a changing climate. So we talk about mangrove, we talk about restoration, and we talk about a bit about climate change. I think everybody knows that mangrove is a key coastal ecosystem that has strong connection with climate change. How and why this issue matters to the mangrove management and restoration. So let's hear it from the speakers later. Before we start the presentation from the speakers, I would like to give a short introduction and background about this webinar. Next. So in the last decade, mangrove restoration has been the highlight of national agenda. Next. In the South Asia, like Indonesia. In responding the increasing mangrove loss and degradation, Indonesia has set target of about 50,000 hectares of mangrove restoration to be achieved in 2024 to compensate over about 600,000 hectares of degraded mangrove forests. Next. And the neighbor mangrove countries like Malaysia and Philippines also face similar challenges and seek for improved restoration approach as part of the best mangrove management practices. So today we're going to hear Dr. Dan Fries, who will give us the overview of the status of Southeast Asia mangrove, and also Dr. Adri from Malaysia to share about his lesson learned about mangrove restoration in Malaysia. Next. So in addition to anthropogenic stressor, mangrove forests are also threatened by climate change impact. So we have a lot of studies about the impact of sea level rise on mangrove. And the recent studies show that Indo-Pacific mangroves are vulnerable to sea level rise. And the evidence shows that the fate of most mangrove forests in this region links to the sediment supply. So if we have low sediment supply, so the mangrove is very vulnerable to sea level rise. Next. And on the other hand, our neighbor in Philippines, the mangrove forest has been destroyed by severe typhoons. So today, we're going to hear Dr. Samuel to share about the story about what he found in mangrove in the Philippines destroyed by typhoon, and also how they deal with this. Next. So how far mangrove can sustain against climate change impact? Nowadays, the researchers have established monitoring around the world in order to assess the capacity of mangrove to adapt with climate change. For example, we use this kind of instrument to assess mangrove capacity to the sea level rise. And also Dr. Yaya today from LIPI Indonesia will also explain how to assess mangrove health as the parameter of the quality of mangrove ecosystem. Next. And the threats become crucial as many coastal areas are at risk to climate impacts after the absence of mangrove forests. So mangrove restoration should aim not only for greening the coast, but importantly for restoring mangrove back to initial state. They are able to provide the added value of reducing climate risk. So this is what we want to discuss today. And next. So with the increasing climate concern, it is important to adjust restoration effort to incorporate the climate into decision making, because as the uncertainty climate change impact, if we put it in the restoration planning and design, we can assure whether the target areas will be suitable under future condition. So today, next. To highlight this issue, today IMRO, our office, is hosting a mangrove webinar aiming to enhance understanding of the interaction between mangrove restoration and climate change. And we are very fortunate to have super speakers from 4 Asian countries. So first, I would like to maybe greet to my mangrove fellows from Singapore, Dr. Dan Fries. Thank you, Dan, for coming today, for joining us. And also Dr. Adri from Malaysia. Thank you, Audrey. And Dr. Yaya from LIPI, Indonesia. Apa kabar, Pak Yaya? And also Seth will be joining us today after, before we finish this one. So first, we're going to have the first presenter, Dr. Adri from Malaysia. Please, Dr. Adri. Dr. Adri is a senior lecturer from Universitas Kebangsaan Malaysia. So he will present about is mangrove restoration being done right? So it's very challenging question. So let's hear about it.
Selamat siang and good afternoon to Dr. Frida Siddiq and I first would like to thank the organizer, the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries Indonesia, for the invitation and for having all of us here today. Appreciate the invitation and honored to be here indeed. And it's good to be around all my good friends here today and all the participants. So can you see my screen, Dr. Frida?
Good.
Okay. All right. So as correctly pointed out by Dr. Frida, Bapak Nyoman and Dr. Teja in their opening speeches just now, we basically do not have much time to waste on making bad and wrong decisions pertaining to the sustainability and the status of our immediate future. So it is our responsibility, the current generation, basically to ensure and to collectively uphold the triple bottom lines of sustainability. So in essence, our environment, our economy, and our social well-being. So one of the key identified global missions that we all have agreed and we have to achieve is to maintain the global climate condition by perhaps reversing our negative contributions and slow down the inertia of the consequences of our actions. So before we even speak about restoration, I would like to highlight this one important point. So one way to make things right is by protecting what we have left. So we can do that by conserving and protecting our tropical rainforests, our green lungs, the kidneys of the earth, basically all the wetlands and particularly the subject of our discussions today, the mangroves. Mangroves are perhaps the most unique and at the same time versatile and extremely important ecosystems located in between land and sea, the tropical and subtropical zone. Yeah, I do always market it as the trademark or the signature habitat of or ecosystem of the tropics. And particularly important for us in ASEAN, all the countries combined, we collectively have the highest number, the largest abundance and the extent compared to other regions throughout the equator. So we have to be proud of that. But then, remarkably, as pointed out by Dr. Frida also, and maybe Dr. Dan Fries will delve into this later, we are also the hotspot of the global mangrove loss. What a coincidence, right? Many of the nations, in fact, all of the countries are striving to develop. Yeah? We are all striving to push for the social and economic pillars at the expense of our environment, particularly our coastal ecosystems. We exploit the coastal lands for agriculture and in this case aquaculture combined and urban development. Yeah? And we left the ponds abandoned after several years before other kind of developments or encroachments seep in instead of rehabilitating. We mine, we dredge sands and coastal land to supply for development on land. And we pollute our rivers and put extra pressures on them. So the effluents, the runoffs, these all ultimately puts pressures on the downstream ecosystems to mediate. So these pictures are just to open up your eyes and minds. Yeah? Basically, we wouldn't need to talk about restoration if we have all of these habitats healthy and intact. But then to rectify our past mistakes, maybe current mistakes too, which now coincides with extreme weather events, climate change, if you like, we have to do our part in conserving mangroves the right way, the correct manner. So have a look at this picture. I'm pretty sure it's quite familiar all throughout ASEAN. And speaking for the many countries and governments in our regions that were affected by the 2004 tsunami and the series of typhoons and tropical storms, many millions or billions of ringgit, rupiah, dongs, pesos, bahts, dollars and energy have been spent to react to the impacts. But mainly I would say panic response. Restoring mangrove is a complex process, right? That needs to be founded on the principles of ecosystem management. So a common mistake in mangrove restoration is that they are perceived as just a planting activity. Not choosing the right species for the right site. Planting and replanting of mangroves are simply done anywhere, everywhere along the coast, including beaches, mudflats, and seagrass beds. And oftentimes, planting activities are being carried out to be justified as actions to mitigate climate change, as well as for future and upcoming impacts and disasters. Surely, many of these activities actually resulted in huge losses and failures. Oftentimes, the location, the sediment, the hydrology, species diversity are not taken into consideration, hence planting the wrong species at the wrong site. And also, local communities, scientific communities were not properly engaged and heard. But I hope the attitude has changed quite progressively around the world, hopefully. Knowledge on mangroves, knowledge on mangrove restoration is available, and it is our continuous role as researchers, especially, we have to play a role to advise and consult the authorities all throughout the tropics. So basically, mangrove is a dynamic ecosystem. They may propagate seaward if the sediment and elevation stabilize, and they may retreat and move landward with the increase of sea level. The function, I'm pretty sure all of you know, is as nurseries for coastal protection and whatnot. But then, by building bunds or seawalls and other physical structures, we inhibit these natural processes, these dynamic processes from taking place. And one huge advice here is that mangroves require buffer to play the buffering role to protect our coast and to protect ourselves as coastal communities. They will not survive in flooded or stagnant water for a long period of time, and they live in an already high pressured and stressful environment, so we must not add extra pressure on them. And the best way to understand mangrove restoration, or to practice good restoration, is to emulate the recovery processes that mangroves go through after an impact from natural disturbances. These are some of the examples. So there are various types and extent of impacts posed by nature disturbances, and the way mangroves react to these disturbances vary. This, for example, is a series of steps in the regeneration cycle of a mangrove forest caused by the death of a group of trees that creates gaps in the canopy. So depending on the size of gaps and types of disturbances, there will be slight variation in the recovery design and time scale. But the good thing is this optimal amount of disturbance impacts actually catalyzes natural rejuvenation of the whole forest. Yeah? This also defines mangrove as the dynamic ecosystem, and if I may, also define them as a forever young ecosystem. So the younger generation of plants, if you can see from this image, they have the chance, the opportunity to grow after the death of the parent trees or the older trees. And these should be studied and to be understood to understand good restoration activities if we need to assist. Yeah? So natural disturbances are basically good, yeah? But humans' impacts on mangroves are usually massive, most of the time permanent. Some human activities also cause chain reactions in which the impacts may be visible later on or indirectly, such as in the case of coastal erosion, subsidence, etc. Therefore, again and again, we must always reflect and analyze on the intensity, the magnitude, the scale of our actions and their impacts on these unique forested wetlands. It's not just normal wetlands, not just normal forest, it's a forested wetland. So we need to understand the basic ecology of the ecosystem as well. And the significant impact that we cause due to patchy development and careless planning is fragmentation of mangrove forests. Fragmentation is a major ecosystem, major driver of ecosystem degradation. It reduces the capacity of habitats to provide important services. I would like to attract you to this study. Actually, if you have time, please refer to Dale's, Brian Brown's and colleagues' research published in scientific reports. They conducted this multi-scale analysis using global estimates of mangrove density, as well as the regional drivers. So by understanding these, we can determine the type or range of assistance that we can provide, as there are different or variety of response mechanisms in which the ecosystems will react. Forest fragmentation, especially mangrove fragmentation and compartmentalized management and jurisdiction on resources actually expose us to many issues such as marine debris. I think Dr. Frida has highlighted in the video in the beginning. So many mangrove forests are still perceived as the most convenient dumping sites. And while some mangrove estuaries are suppressed by the impacts of leachate, overflow garbage from nearby landfills, and mind you, this is an estuary, right? This is the hydrology is super important. We need to understand that because it will affect basically the whole downstream ecosystem. And accumulated plastic litter can have major negative consequences on mangroves. We may see this as eyesore, but they occupy ground space and create unnecessary competition, deterring seedlings to establish and grow. Remember the gap image I showed earlier? So no chance for seedling to be recruited and to take root here. And then at the same time, they suffocate and choke faunal organisms. Plastic marine debris also affect tidal flushing, causing stress on the ecosystem with maybe increased salinity as well as chemical deposits from these plastics and microplastic. And also, in the case like this, these plastic litter, these marine debris could also promote the spread of mosquito and other pest and water related diseases. So it's big impact there if you think about it. So there are good models and guidelines to be followed. For instance, this ecological mangrove restoration is introduced by our friends at Mangrove Action Project. Basically, the guidelines actually advise us to understand the ecosystem, the ecological condition of the site, the type of disturbance, the threats and the risks, as well as the changes that is faced by each particular site that we are targeting. We need to understand the hydrology, the sediment, biochemical conditions. We need to ensure seedling stock or supplies from nearby intact mangroves, for example. And we need to understand also project the succession, basically all the basic ecological criteria. So the advice is by providing and creating these conducive and suitable conditions, mangrove will naturally flourish. And the best part is planting may not even be required. So this is very important for all of us to understand. And note also that EMR, one of the key important objectives of EMR is the significant involvement of local and surrounding communities. Because bear in mind, they are undoubtedly the key stakeholders in any restoration project. They should be involved because they know their surrounding best, they know the history of the area, and most importantly, they are the immediate direct beneficiaries of the services provided by the mangroves. And other efforts are also being put by many organizations to increase knowledge and supports on mangrove, on how to restore them. For example, this one, the Blue Carbon Initiative came up with a method to understand what's the blue carbon, and then PEMC does their job also on understanding the status of mangroves and coral reefs and seagrass and salt marshes throughout Southeast Asia. And of course, the governance study, they're also done by our friends at WWF, IUCN, and many more actually. There are huge amount of references and research being carried out throughout the tropics. I would like to highlight some of the some photos that could probably inspire most of you. So in this area, actually, this is an abandoned spot of aquaculture pond. A little effort was put here in this abandoned pond. So the owner, by just breaking bits of the wall, tiny bit of the wall, the tides naturally carry the sediment, the water, and the seedlings to let them grow, and perhaps to take over the ponds. So that no hard engineering here. And this one is a very bizarre case too. No hard engineering work here. It's just a group of local communities and local NGOs. They gathered around one day, planting seedlings in and around these abandoned aquaculture ponds. And voila, you have this super nice design looking from above. And you can also see some canopy gaps here already created naturally. But then hard engineering may sometimes be needed in a very critical condition like this one in Tanjung Piai, the southernmost tip of continental Asia. So this particular location suffered one of the worst erosion rates and mangrove loss. So several years after the construction of these wave breakers, the sediment stabilizes, and no planting was done here in this area. So, but new natural recruitment was observed. So this is a very interesting outcome from these activities. I would like to quickly point out to you that that the protection of Matang mangroves for more than 100 years as a permanent forest reserve not only contribute to the sustainable production of charcoal, as well as other forest products and services. It at the same time actually promotes natural expansion of mangrove forest area. So by protecting an area, in this case for sustainable forest management, perhaps we lose the diversity, but we have economic income from there, but the area, mangrove forest area remains intact. So all in all, we need to be clear with the objectives and the missions of our restoration projects, basically. Ideally, I would expect mangrove restoration project to finally create a healthy, functioning mangrove habitat, an ecosystem that provides, regulates, hosts, and supports these multitude range of ecosystem services. And restoration efforts should also be strengthened together with other conservation and governance measures and mechanisms like payments for ecosystem services, carbon financing, establishing more protected areas for wise use and sustainable use. I think my friends later will delve onto this. And bear in mind, restoration is not a numbers game. Please, 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 it's not a numbers game. It shouldn't be done as a one-off event or just a photo op. You and get recognition and go on the news. Then they all die off the next day. This is not cool. So it requires honest commitment from all of us. It requires us to strategize, to plan, monitor, and to work collaboratively. Of course, there are increasing understanding throughout these years, and more brains, money, energy, technology are being put into these. And yes, ultimately, political will and strong commitment from the states, from the governments, they are the land owners, basically. So with a strong commitment from them, these would govern the success of mangrove conservation, as well as to promote sustainable development for the benefits of our generation and for future generation. I think I end there, Frida. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you. All these very interesting slides with the super photos from your field. So next, talking about the mangrove health, we have Dr. Yaya from LIPI, who has developed what we call it the mangrove health monitoring in Indonesia. Dr. Yaya, this time is yours.
Baik, terima kasih Bu Frida. Could you please to open the PowerPoint, the host? Oh. Yeah. All right, thank you. Thank you again, Ibu Frida. Thank you for all audiences for having me in this afternoon discussion. And good afternoon. Hello to other speakers, especially Dan, because I invited you for our activities in the next 2 weeks. Well, my name is Yaya. I work for LIPI, and here I provide this presentation together with my colleague, Iwayan Eka Darmawan, who has been running mangrove monitoring program since 2014, when I left my office to start my study. So when finished my study, and I directly joined with his team to finalizing mangrove monitoring program that will be ending next year. And here I also show many logos because those institutions fully support us for running the monitoring program in our country, in Indonesia. Next, please. And this is the core team members comprising mangrove researchers from various universities from East to West Indonesia. They are really help us to make the monitoring program happen. Next, please. And in these pictures, we also have many people involved in the FGD to formulate mangrove health index. And the man in that corner is our colleague who created Monmang. Ibu Frida say Makada, but actually we changed the name because Makada is already taken for the other trademark. So we changed the name of our applications, Monmang. So Monmang is a handy equipment that can help collecting, recording, and analyzing data. Well, later I will explain more a bit. Next, please. So, speaking about mangrove in Indonesia, we are still facing an issue on basic data availability. For example, now we have a big project of mangrove planting or rehabilitations, but finding a suitable area for rehabilitation is still challenging. This challenge always become a hot topic for discussions in many meetings with management agencies in Ministry of Forestry and Environment or Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. Ibu Frida knows about this. Indeed, we have a one map policy, and Ministry of Forestry and Environment is the custodian for mangrove map, which I also involved in this team. But at the moment, mangrove mapping in Indonesia still cannot be done in the same year for the whole area in the country. So we cannot yearly monitor the extent change. In addition to that, the national data on mangrove quality is also lacking. The thing about mangrove coverage, biodiversity, ecosystem function, and services, those are valuable data, but the national data is very hard to find. Yes, we have many studies scattered in different areas done by many agencies, university, with different approach, and it's hard. Sometimes we need to synchronize, but at the moment, the data is not practical for management in the national level. So because of this background, we think Indonesia needs at least two metrics to value that can represent quantity and quality of mangrove resources. Based on these metrics, we might determine degraded area for rehabilitations, conservation, and so on. All right, next, please. So this is the milestones that LIPI have done so far. LIPI attempt to contribute to provide data and knowledge of mangrove resources. Start in 2014, we established permanent sites to be monitored, which is actually an extending program of Core Map CTI that has been doing core reef monitoring since early 2000s. Therefore, we selected sites close to the monitoring sites for coral reef, which is in small islands, or we call it oceanic mangroves. And between 2015 and 2017, we standardized the monitoring method and created a training system for mangrove surveyors or assessors, and also professional certification systems for the surveyors. It has been endorsed by National Board of Professional Certifications, or we call it BNSP. From that, we have enough skillful and certified surveyors that can do monitor with the standardized method. Thus, we can cover mangrove area in around Indonesian mangroves. In 2018, we started to conceptualize mangrove health index based on the data that have been collected during monitoring project. and we come up with idea to develop Android app. So many more people hope can involve in this monitoring system. Organizations in LIPI and CoreMap CTI in 2019 has delayed our plan, but in this year we finally can launch MHI and Monang, the Android app. So in the next year, hope all the system in monitoring health can be finalized. Next, please. So the summary, we got actually through Mangrove, through CoreMap CTI, we have provided standard monitoring method, training and certification system for mangrove surveyors, Android app, and of course we are providing web-based data management and dissemination so everyone can access the data. Next, please. For monitoring mangrove, we already published three book editions of monitoring guidelines in 2014, 2017, and this year. Next, please. Yeah. So in this book, in these guideline books, because we want to invite as many as people who can engage in this monitoring program, or simply we call it citizen science. So we select parameters that can easily be conducted by non-specialists, like canopy coverage, density, trunk diameter, forest height, and so on. And we think these are still reliable parameters and still scientifically sound. Next, please. We also provide a spreadsheet template, so it can help the surveyor, especially non-specialists, to analyze data and interpret the result easily. This template then becomes the backbone of Android apps or Monmam. Next, please. And this is the distributions of the monitoring sites. Altogether, we have about 30 sites. We monitor it every 2 years. Next, please. And then for providing the human resources for monitoring those 30 sites, LIPI also has established professional certification board, or we call it LSP, which is endorsed by BNSP. And the method of mangrove monitoring has been recognized and assigned as national standard by BNSP as well. And at the moment, LSP LIPI has 7 mangrove assessors, and about 55 surveyors has been certified. All right, next, please. Back to mangrove forest. We talk about mangrove health index that we have already studied. If we have a contiguous block like in this picture, the different state between stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3, it's clearly can be conceptualized. But in our case, according to the monitoring data, we found many more variations. So it's sometimes we have to think how to find the best metrics or the best way to judge or to value to say this is better than the others. Next, please. So from that point, we are thinking that we have to find out a single metrics, and we call it Mangrove Health Index. That this is a single metrics or value or parameters that can represent or reflect and show the quality of mangrove ecosystem, and it can be compared among sites or among different times. So we attempt to conceptualize the index with the criteria should be simple and practical, but still reliable, and also it can be integrated with spatial data. So we can have a map with the attribute of quality of the mangrove in the site. Next, please. So this is the formula or mangrove health index we propose. It contains 3 forest parameters: canopy coverage, PBH, and sampling count. Next, please. Where does the formula come from? So I found these 3 papers as foundation for developing our MHI, to be simple for me. So at first, one paper show mangrove quality index developed in Matang Forest in Malaysia. It has been inspiring us, but we couldn't directly adopt this index because it includes soil and water parameters, which is, it needs lab works that we do not have resources for doing that for the whole mangrove area in our country, in Indonesia. So we see to the other 2 papers that offer simpler concept in the index development. They propose a concept of a stand structural complexity, which may reflect many aspects of status, including forest structures, biodiversity, and ecosystem function and services. So more complex is better for the mangrove condition. Next, please. So according to those papers, as well as a consensus among Indonesian mangrove researchers in Indonesia during FGD in 2018, we finally selected several forest stand parameters. And then for index development, we use monitoring data revealed from about 831 plots, 10 meters times 10 meters. Next, please.
Ya.
Yep.
3 menit lagi.
Okay. Sedikit lagi, Bu. Yeah. And this is the mangrove conditions based on MHI, which yellow indicate low values and red is high values. But I will show the interesting site here in Merauke. Can you, next please? Yeah, here. It's very clear, which is MHI value matched with the conditions of mangrove in the field. Next, please. Then we try to do interpolations with simple regressions method, incorporating 58 data samples collected in Segara Anakan Lagoon. And then we have a formula that we can interpolate MHI in the spatial data. Can you next, please? Yeah. This is the appearance of MHI map in Segara Anakan Lagoon. We hope we can do these things for the whole area in Indonesia. Next, please. The last slide. So in the last slide, here I would like to show you Monmang, another app. So I have already told that this is a simplifications of data collection, recording, and analyzing for mangrove health monitoring program. And this application will be continuously developed. We will embed some features like artificial intelligence for species determinations and DBH estimators, protectors, and etc. We may also make a link between this app with a server that can collect big data of mangrove Indonesia. So I hope it can happen in the near future. So if you are interested, you can download, install it in your mobile device, and have a try. And last presentation, last slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for all people that have already support our program, and special thanks to Dr. Frida Siddiq and Bro for the invitation to talk in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yaya. It's very interesting and very useful information about what LIPI has done for the mangrove health monitoring. And next, after we as in the first presenter explained about what happened to the mangrove in Malaysia, and now we're going to have to get an overview from Dr. Denfries about the status of Southeast Asian mangrove. So then, please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Thank you, everyone, for the introduction, and thank you especially, Dr. Frida, for the really kind invitation. It's a real privilege. Thank you. I hope everyone can see my screen. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll give you an idea of some of the ongoing research which is happening, which might give us an idea of what is the trajectory and the state of our mangroves in Southeast Asia. And I'll also give a quick kind of global overview to give the context of how Southeast Asia is doing compared to some other parts of the world in terms of mangrove deforestation and conservation. So these are two very famous articles which I think really put mangrove forests on the international policy agenda and got people thinking about mangrove conservation in the same way that they think about the conservation of rainforests and coral reefs. And this was, for example, this piece called A World Without Mangroves, where a group of international mangrove experts discussed if this was a possibility or not. And in the early 2000s, people really thought that we might see a world without mangroves because we were losing them at maybe 2% or more per year. And so we see a lot of other groups now, using this information to talk about the conservation of mangroves, that they may all but functionally disappear by the end of this century, and lots of different NGOs using mangroves as a call to arms for global conservation. So these were two very impactful papers that really got people thinking about the importance of mangroves when maybe we hadn't considered them as much before. And there was another really influential report that came out in 2007, The World's Mangroves. It was published by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. And this is one of the graphs here. And they basically estimated that mangroves globally, all of these estimates were around 1 to 3% per year, which was, one of the fastest rates of loss for an ecosystem in the world. And they highlighted that Asia and Southeast Asia in particular were really at the epicenter of mangrove diversity, but also mangrove loss. And so, you can see in this graph here, we had some of the biggest declines between 1990 and 2005. Now, this was done by a literature review, taking each country in the world, getting as many estimates of mangrove areas as we could, and trying to come up with a trend. And it came up with this global rate of 1 to 3% per year. And some countries were higher, some countries were lower. So that was in the early 2000s, but also around this time, we started to get more satellite imagery. And this satellite you see here is the Landsat satellite from the United States. And it has been instrumental in helping us monitor not just mangroves, but all sorts of environments and land cover change. And even though we've had satellite imagery from Landsat since the late 1970s, surprisingly, it was only in 2016 when we got the first map of global mangrove loss. And that was for between the year 2000 and the year 2012. And this was on a global scale, and it showed something quite different from those previous studies. Instead of us losing mangroves at 1 to 3% per year, it said that at least since the year 2000, we've lost at 0.2 to 0.6% per year. So almost one order of magnitude lower loss rates. So we're still losing mangroves, but not as fast as those early reports were suggesting. And then since this study, other other studies, most recently one from NASA, which came out only a few months ago, showing that also mangrove loss was even lower than this one. So that suggests something is happening globally, which is good news. We're not losing them as fast as we thought. And I want to show you this paper that came from NASA a few months ago, because I think it's a groundbreaking study, because it was global, and it showed we're losing mangroves at 0.1% per year. And what was also interesting, that it started to suggest what was causing the mangrove loss. And it suggested that around the world, 62% of all the loss that they saw was due to human use, land use change, often for commodities such as aquaculture and rice. But actually, almost 40% was from natural causes. So they're, we sometimes forget that mangroves also have a lot of natural dynamics, and some of those natural dynamics, of course, can be influenced by and made worse by people and our management actions. And it also showed that different parts of the world face different threats to their mangroves. So in Australia or India or Brazil, it's natural causes of mangrove loss that dominate. But in Southeast Asia, you can see on this map, most of the countries are in red, and that is the human-driven losses of mangroves. And of course, that's things that we're causing, but hopefully it's also things that we can change through conservation. And so if we zoom in to this, and you can see the Southeast Asia, which is G on this map with all the yellow and orange color. And that is basically showing that mangroves were lost between 1996 and 2016 due to commodity production. So for food and other commodities, which was very different from the rest of the region, where shoreline erosion or cyclones or other types of human conversion may also be causing a problem. But in Southeast Asia, it's very clear that it's human-driven mangrove loss. And so this is another study that showed mangrove loss in Southeast Asia. And what this map shows is that even though Southeast Asia is still the hotspot for human loss of mangroves, within Southeast Asia, there's a lot of variation. And some places in Southeast Asia are not losing so much mangrove forests. But as you can see in this map, there are some hotspots of loss that continue even into this century. And in particular, Myanmar, for example, which has the highest rates of mangrove loss in the world, which are a number of times above the global average. But even then, regionally, we're the hotspot of global mangrove loss, but it's still not as fast as it used to be. So that is hopefully some good news. But it's not just about how much mangrove we're losing, it's about what is causing the loss. And this is important for a couple of reasons. If we know what is causing the loss, then maybe we can tailor our management and policies to solve or reduce those issues. What is causing the loss is also important for our climate change mitigation efforts and our calculating of our climate change emissions from mangrove deforestation, because aquaculture releases a different proportion of mangrove carbon compared to harvesting, for example. So this is important for us to know for management and policy. And perhaps no surprise that in Southeast Asia, the biggest cause of loss after 2000 was aquaculture. But we often think everything, all mangrove loss is about aquaculture. And actually, what we see in Southeast Asia is that it's the dominant cause of loss, but it's not the only cause of loss. And in some countries such as Myanmar, we see rice conversion to rice paddy. In other parts of the region, we see oil palm conversion, urban expansion, and other things. So all of those drivers of loss might require different management and policies to solve. And I'll give you, I'll zoom into Indonesia for a moment. And this is a great paper by Muhammad Ilman, and it showed aquaculture in particular in Indonesia. And as you see, the dashed line on this graph is the area of tambak. And as it goes up, particularly after the 1970s, the area of mangrove goes down. And so this is a great historical view of mangrove loss, because even the maps I've shown you are from 2000, but obviously we have a long history of mangrove utilization much before that. So if we look at Indonesia's rates of mangrove loss, and I choose Indonesia, one, because of this seminar, but two, because Indonesia is 20% or so of the world's mangrove forest. So what happens in Indonesia has a global impact. And if we take that FAO report I introduced at the beginning, it suggested that mangrove loss was being lost at 1.2% per year in Indonesia from 1980 to 2005, which is quite high. But with those kind of new satellite technologies and the more recent studies, actually in Indonesia, it's a different, or becoming a different story, which I think is good news. And now most of these global studies are talking about 0.2 to 0.3% per year, which is different to the rates that we saw in the 20th century. Most of these are global studies using satellite imagery. And of course, there are issues with using global studies compared to national studies. But I think they give us a good idea, and they're all quite similar, even though they all use different methods. And what is also interesting is this orange line, which is also from the FAO Global Forest Resource Assessment report, which came out a few months ago. And if you look at mangrove loss for Indonesia in that report, from the 1990s, it was 0.8% per year. But actually, if you only take the data for the last 10 years or so, they also show much lower rates of loss. And the Global Forest Resource Assessment is not a satellite, based on reports which are submitted to the FAO. So again, a different data source, but shows similar numbers, which is very good. So we can discuss why the numbers are different, and other studies may give different numbers, but generally, globally, in Southeast Asia and even in some countries, we are seeing a difference between high rates of mangrove loss before the year 2000 and lower rates of loss after the year 2000. And that is a trend that we see throughout the world. And so that's good news. And partly we've seen a reduction in mangrove loss because of what Dr. Audrey said earlier. We have more brains, money, energy and effort into mangrove conservation. So I think we should celebrate the great efforts that NGOs, governments, commercial stakeholders and others are doing around mangroves nationally and internationally. And then as also has been introduced, we have the potential to restore mangroves as well. And this study by an international group led through the University of Cambridge and Nature Conservancy suggested that actually there are 800,000 hectares of former mangrove areas globally that we could restore. Now, it's not as easy as that because this doesn't include land tenure, opportunity costs, and other socioeconomic factors, but it shows the potential scope of global mangrove restoration. And almost 40% of that restoration potential is in Southeast Asia, which is great news. And even in Indonesia, this study suggested that there are almost 200,000 hectares of land biophysically suitable for restoration, again, once we fix socioeconomic and governance issues. And all of these data sets are freely available on their website. And it shows that particularly in places such as West Papua, we have large areas that have a very high restoration potential score. So they should be easier to restore than some other parts of Southeast Asia. So again, there's a big scope to bring back some of the losses that we've caused. if we can do the sort of things that Dr. Aldry talked about in terms of doing restoration right. And that is still a big challenge, of course, but there are reasons to be optimistic, I think. There are reasons to be pessimistic in Southeast Asia, and this study I wanted to highlight because it involved some of the work of Dr. Frida Siddiq, looking at the threat of sea level rise and the decade in which mangroves in Southeast Asia might be inundated by sea level rise. So that's a threat which will continue in the future to get worse. There are new types and causes of deforestation happening in Southeast Asia and elsewhere, which we are starting to see. Places that weren't that had large areas of mangroves previously and now starting to experience deforestation. And of course, we have continuing fragmentation, and the habitat quality of what is left is very variable. And this is why the Mangrove Health Index is such an important tool for us to understand the quality of what we have left. So there are definitely big challenges that we will face in Southeast Asia in the future. But overall, I want to give an optimistic message. 2020 has been a tough year, right, for everyone, and we sometimes don't have reasons to be optimistic, but I think mangroves give us a potential reason to be optimistic. And there are lots of organizations now, such as Conservation Optimism, that are saying that if you tell everybody the doom and gloom story, that people will give up and that they will think that their actions cannot solve the crises that we face. And that actually, if you can inspire people by showing that their previous conservation action has worked, then we might be able to convince people to carry on and consolidate that hard work. And I really do believe that mangrove forests globally, but in Southeast Asia, can be something a success that we can celebrate. And the hard work of everybody listening to this webinar who has contributed, academics, NGOs, government agencies who have been working hard to conserve mangroves, and some of the recent, even this year, announcements that we've seen for conservation from Indonesia and elsewhere, I think give us cause for optimism, but it has to be cautious optimism. The job is not done. And even though in the last 15 years or so, we have seen a more positive trend, we are still losing mangroves, and our gains may be only temporary because of our future changes. So certainly we're getting a better idea of the information we need to understand the state of our mangroves in Southeast Asia. The science, I think, is really improving. And it shows that mangrove conservation is working. But we have a long way to go. And I think webinars like this are a great example of getting people from all over ASEAN to share the good stories and the bad stories, and to learn from each other to secure the future of mangroves as we go on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, for the very positive voice and very good news about the mangrove reduction of the mangrove loss in our region. It's very good. So the last but not the least, we have our last speaker from the Philippines, Dr. Sefrino Samo. He will give us like a story about what's happened in the mangrove in the Philippines, just destroyed by the typhoon. I think that a couple days ago in Philippines just got the typhoon. Is that right, Sef?
Yeah, 2 days ago.
Okay.
And there's another one coming.
Oh, another one coming. Hope you survive. Okay, Sef, before it's coming, so please do your presentation.
All right. Hold on. There. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, good. All good.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. You can start now.
Good afternoon. Sorry for the coming in late. I'm coming from the other webinar. I'll be presenting, I don't know if you're familiar with this climate change related disturbance. We call it typhoon. Maybe perhaps Vietnam and maybe Cambodia as well. Typhoon is very prominent in the Philippines. Right? It's like a driver of the state of the mangroves. I'll be very quick, and I'll be focusing on the typhoons and the impacts, mainly those two. But I will move further. I'll be discussing things that I believe haven't discussed yet in the literature about the recovery and indicators. And basically, I'll be talking about the research needs from my country's perspective. But I don't know if Prida showed this to you already. My talk will basically come from Dan and Frida's book on mangrove coast, and I have this chapter. All right, so okay, so Philippines were neighbor. Australia, Indonesia and Philippines were very close, but luckily for you, you're below that portion of the equator, and we're getting these typhoons. Like if you have a biodiversity hotspot, we have a typhoon hotspot. And if you look at this scale, we're getting more of a category 4 or category 5 scales. No? On the average, we do receive around 20-year typhoon. There are good things and not so good things about typhoons. Well, one, you will have a steady source of water. That's a good one. But the other thing is that these typhoon are quite catastrophic. We do receive around 3 to 5 typhoons in a year. I think you are familiar with Super Typhoon Haiyan. We call it Yolanda here. And just 2 days ago, the one that Frida mentioned, we got an almost similar scale with that of Super Typhoon Haiyan. Luckily, it didn't hit the capital, but still it's quite strong, right? So in the Philippine context, if we do receive these catastrophic typhoons, how are the mangroves adapting, right? Okay, so for some of you who I met in the past, I think I've shown this slide several times. We do practice restoration, similar with most Southeast Asian countries. It started in 1990s. Most of these planted mangroves probably survive, and maybe they are still existing. If you plant mangroves now, just a general idea, it will take maybe in a matter of 10 years, you will see a good sign that it's really developing to be a good forest. But for you to see a meaningful forest, when I say meaningful, it's like a forestry term, with a good structural complexity, with good coral cover, good canopy cover, maybe at the least, you need to have 15 years. You need to have 15 years for the mangroves to develop that vegetation maturity and sediment maturity. Now, if the vegetation and the sediments are improving, it also follows that the fauna, in this case the mollusks and the nekton assemblages, they respond positively to an improving vegetation and sediment condition. These are standard terminologies: leaf area index, above ground biomass density, organic matter, including that of nutrients. In fact, you can easily see a gradient of improvement from the mollusk assemblages from the infauna within the sediment to the surface sediment, all the way to the assemblages that are catered or attached to the mangrove vegetative part. That is the arboreal component. So if you plant mangroves, maybe you will see a good impact in a matter of 15 years. Now, if there is a typhoon like this one's catastrophic, category 4. This one is category 3. This one is category 5. Prior to Super Typhoon Haiyan, this side. Prior to this slide, my thinking is that those restored mangroves lacks the structural complexity, and therefore they do lack the resilience against typhoon. All right, that was 2009. The occurrence of Super Typhoon Yolanda changed my mindset. If the typhoon is really strong, it doesn't matter if it's a restored mangrove or an intact mangrove or a highly structurally complex mangrove. If the magnitude of the typhoon is really strong, then it will really wipe out your forest. Okay, what are the usual impacts? You can see these things, very common. It's like the entire tree being extracted, or sometimes what we call the concept of standing dead. The trees are still there, but there are no more foliage, right? Or worse, you can see things like this. It's like an 18 or an 19, almost 20-year-old mangroves. They look beautiful. They look structurally good. All of a sudden, one single event, your mangrove vegetation is gone. All right. I'm optimistic, but I'm also pessimistic somewhat. Now, the impacts of typhoon commonly reported are the impacts on vegetations, like outright dead, or maybe outright total forest collapse. In some cases, there are also changes or impacts on the sediments. There are cases, for example, in the US, when there's a typhoon, they do have some reports that typhoons actually resulted to sediment dumping. It's like when there's a storm surge, it's highly likely that the sediments from other places will be dumped to a mangrove forest. So if you have a level sediment in this site, for example, maybe depending on the height of the surge, you can get a minimum of 0.2 meter, or in this case, maybe around 0.5 meter, all of a sudden sediment dumping. That's commonly reported. In the case of Super Typhoon Haiyan, however, there was a case, and I don't know if you will be surprised, but this image and this image are actually less than 30 kilometers apart. So one site received sediment, the other site is the loss of surface elevation, corresponding to around half a meter elevation loss. So which one would you prefer? I don't have any preference. In my opinion, they both have negative impacts to the mangroves, right? So of course, we know in the mangroves, we are very familiar with the muddy environment. If there is a strong storm surge, most likely you will lose that surface elevation, and you will have your exposed roots. Okay. On the contrary, it is possible that if you have massive sediment dumping, then you won't see your roots. Right. Okay. Now, I mentioned I mentioned vegetation and sediment, most likely because the mangrove vegetation were damaged, because the sediment was damaged. The faunal assemblage immediately will feel the obvious differences on the loss of habitat and the loss of food. I've shown this slide earlier, wherein if you have a good trajectory, you will see indicator species corresponding to different growth stages of the mangroves, from young stage, intermediate to mature stage. In the event that there's a catastrophic typhoon, this thing, your indicator species will actually revert back at the least 5 to 10 years of the restoration trajectory. So if you have a damaged mangroves, you will lose that amount of time, wherein maybe you're expecting that you will have a highly diverse mangrove forest. But if you have a typhoon, then most likely you will have a restoration trajectory that digress, right? This image is just showing the same thing. The black ones are the impacted site. Prior to the typhoon, this thing, around 20-year-old forest, it is almost similar to that of a 50-year-old and a natural forest, right? Immediately after the typhoon, the mollusk assemblages digress, right? Here, it joins the early stage mangrove forest. And for how long will it recover? It's quite tricky to assess. The recovery of the assemblage of the mollusk assemblage will depend on the recovery of the vegetation and the sediment, right? So, which brings me to this point. If the mangroves are affected, will they recover? So, oops, sorry. My immediate answer in this case, yes, they do recover. This one is less than 1 year after Super Typhoon Haiyan. Same thing as well, this thing. Less than 1 year after the catastrophic typhoon. However, when you say recovery, there is what we call the concept of lag effect. At first, you will easily see a good recovery pathway. It might look that they are recovering very good, but because the sediment is damaged, maybe it is not conducive enough for the mangrove vegetation to grow. All of a sudden, after 5 years, I've seen mangroves that have initial good recovery. After 5 years, it goes down. Now, what I'm saying is that recovery is site specific. If you have a healthy mangroves, maybe you have a better chance of coppicing, and maybe it provided some friction to the effects of the wind, right? But in some cases where the Philippines have mostly fragmented forests, how would you expect a highly fragmented forest to be resilient to a catastrophic typhoon, right? But if in case they will recover, the common parameters that are measured are the seedling recruitment and eventual seedling growth that will be the source of the seedling. That's the reason why if you have a bigger mangrove forest, most likely you will have more sources of seedling recruits, and that seedling recruits will take over the canopy gaps. I remember Dr. Aldrich's thesis all of a sudden. Right now, here, what species will coppice? What species will have high seedling recruits? It depends on where you are. If you're in the shoreline, most likely it will be the Abyssinian, the Soneratia species. As you go inland, then maybe the other species will have to take over. Now, vegetation and sediment damages and recoveries are commonly reported. What I found out is that similar to the restoration trajectory pre-disturbance, I believe that the faunal activities, the mere presence and the mere activities of the fauna, could be mollusks, crabs, or shrimps, or other specimens, their presence alone would be a good indicator for recovery. Why is that? We all know that in the mangroves, the nutrient content is very low. The oxygen level is very low. Look at this crab. It is feeding on a leaf, and the moment that this crab feed on the leaves, it will go down and create burrows, and maybe will dig its own burrows. That simple feeding and burrowing activities would actually provide aeration, which is a badly needed parameter for the mangroves to help them survive after the damages from the typhoon. So I'm still doing some experiment on it, and I have some students who are working on mollusk activities as indicator of post-typhoon recovery. Right, moving forward, Dan mentioned about the mangrove conservation programs. Yeah, as early as year 2000, I think Indonesian Philippines, we had this common timeline. Year 2000, we delineated our key biodiversity areas. I don't know what the status in Indonesia, but in year 2000, these are the key biodiversity areas. 19 years or 20 years after, what happened to these protected areas? Well, the optimistic person that I am, I'm glad to report that these parts, Palawan and some portions of Mindanao in the south, some portions in the north, they are actively protected. They are good. The not so good thing, however, is that mangrove protected areas that are supposed to be under key biodiversity areas, they do experience disturbances, no? Man-made and natural. Now, similar to Indonesia, this is the distribution of fish pond, and fish ponds outnumber the mangroves. If we will have an honest to goodness restoration program, I think, well, we have to supplement the key biodiversity areas with the targeted restoration programs. I don't have a straightforward answer what site should be prioritized. Would it be the typhoon prone or the sea level rise prone areas? Or maybe we can concentrate on focusing on the key biodiversity areas or the KBAs. So that's a struggle. As we understand conservation, as we struggle in doing restoration, this is Manila Bay. I know there are similar issues in Jakarta Bay. At the moment, we have problems, serious problems on reclamation. The green ones are the mangroves. The light blue polygons are the fish ponds. Most of them are abandoned. The light red or light orange polygons are the built-up areas. Under a normal condition, you will expect that mangrove colonization process will happen. But it will not happen if the stressors are still there, maybe mainly the fish pond. Or worse, maybe you are good in conservation, maybe you're doing good restoration, but if you keep reclaiming mangroves, then I don't know where will we end up. And I think that's my last slide. I hope you are familiar now with the Philippine typhoons, and thank you.
Thank you, Self. It's very interesting story about what's happened to the Philippine mangrove with the typhoons. So I think that before we go to the question and answer, I have one, this is not very simple, but one questions to the all speakers. I just want to ask your comments or your suggestions, let's say to the policymakers, what they have to do for the mangrove restoration in the frame of changing climate, where we have the extreme weather, we have typhoon, we have like erosion, or let's say the natural driver. So maybe probably Audrey can answer. What is? Just give me one suggestions.
Your voice is too soft, Rida. I cannot really hear.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So
One suggestion for?
Yeah. So what's the can you give us like only one suggestions to the policymakers when they want to do the mangrove restoration? Yeah, in the frame of, let's say you have like extreme weather, typhoon, or maybe like erosion, something like that. Just give us one suggestion.
Wow, that needs a PhD to answer that one. Now, basically, governments should be prepared with all the basic necessity, basic information that have been presented by all our friends or colleagues just now. We need to understand the status of the lands of the country, yeah? Which areas that are risky, yeah? In the face of these extreme events. That's for one. And then secondly, to identify local stakeholders, yeah, that could be impacted directly from these extreme events as well. So having these two basic information and buy-ins, then we can lay down all the plans to mitigate and as well as to be prepared. So laws, yeah, to regulate protection of these areas is another angle that needs to be ready, by all countries and governments. So yeah, I let the rest of the speakers respond to that as well.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. Maybe Dr. Yaya?
All right. Well, actually, I got two suggestions, but because you said only one, so I choose.
You can choose. You can have two.
Yeah,
if you
I
like.
choose one. Okay. Well, the critical problem actually in Indonesia for restorations is land tenure. So government should fix the land tenure first. After that, we can do the things that more technical. I think it's enough. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Frida?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Well, if I will go with the one straightforward answer, I think most Southeast Asian countries signed the Aichi Convention, the other international treaties. If we will stick at the minimum, if we will stick to those international treaties, I think we are in a good position to see a meaningful program to address climate change. But of course, it's easier said than done. In our experience, restoration program should be accelerated, the meaningful acceleration and the meaningful programs, and it should be carefully targeted to those areas that are vulnerable to natural disasters.
Okay. So how about you, Dan? Do you have any suggestions?
I think the only suggestion is that we have to plan for climate change in everything we do. And that's a very broad suggestion, I know, but often we do things in a very ad hoc way for many good reasons why we do them small pieces at a time. But I think if we can change our thinking and management to planning for climate change, whether that includes what some countries do, which is they buy up the land behind a mangrove in anticipation of that mangrove having to go landward. And that's happening in some countries already, or whether it's planning restoration projects to be at higher elevation than they usually are to give it enough buffer for sea level rise. Whatever it is, as long as we think about climate change at the very beginning and do the actions now and not wait for climate change to hit us. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dan. So I think that we already got all the presenters. We have a very good knowledge now about the restoration and about the climate change, how climate can impact. So I would like to give to the floor back to the MC to have like a question and answer.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Frida. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now we open the discussion section. And very interesting topic. And I'm sure all of you already have a lot of questions. And now, from the Zoom application, we open the discussion session from the raise hand feature, and also Q&A column and room chat. And for all of you who join us on YouTube channel, can ask the question from the room chat. Now we open for the raise hand feature. There is any question? Well, if there is no question on the raise hand feature, we already compile the question from the Q&A column. We open the first station is for 3 questions. We open 3 questions. The first question and the second question is addressed to Dr. Audrey. The first question is from Susan Pudin. How long does it take to gain the trust and commitment of community in mangrove restoration? And the second question addressed to Dr. Dr. Audrey. Would you mind to share with us on Malaysia experience in doing mangrove restoration? What are the use approach? Also, what are the positive and negative lessons from Malaysia that can be learned by other countries? Yes, to Dr. Audrey, please answer the first and the second question. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. So basically, the first, how long does it take to gain trust and commitment from the community? So it depends. For coastal communities, they have been living in that area behind mangrove or within or surrounded by mangrove for many generations. So their dependency on mangroves is high and has been for generations. So their knowledge on mangrove ecosystem, the importance of mangrove is high. So to get their buy-in, to get their trust and commitment would be almost immediate. Okay, that's for sure. But then this is also the importance of knowledge, of understanding of the surrounding. I know I actually came across some coastal communities that didn't really realize of the existence of mangroves. So this is surprising. They eat fish, they live their daily lives, with all the resources, perhaps purchase it from their surrounding, but they didn't really realize that is actually derived from mangrove. So this is another angle that we need to understand. So we need to tackle the direct beneficiaries that really depend on mangrove, especially fishermen, and then the extended community that use mangrove as their secondary for their subsistence, but with lower knowledge. So these groups might need some extra or additional effort for to be included in mangrove restoration. But I would say if local communities is in our discussion now, if we're targeting coastal community, most of the time it is almost immediate. But then other stakeholders, that will need extra effort. For example, like maybe local businesses, private institutions. So we need perhaps some time to convince for them to also contribute. I'm not worried too much about the local communities. Actually, what we need, our effort, we need to extend it to the authorities, to the local authorities. Particularly in Malaysia, in Malaysia's condition, is the state government, because they are pretty much or basically the landowners, right? They have the responsibility to approve development, for example, and to actually support or initiate restoration activities. And it took some great disasters, for example, like in our case, many in Southeast Asia region or Indian Ocean region, it took the tsunami event to make people realize of the importance of mangrove. So we do not want to go near that far. We do not want to be impacted by further extreme events in the future. So we have to continue doing what we're doing now, especially for researchers, academics, and NGOs to disseminate this knowledge. Okay, that I think I hopefully answer the first. And then for second one, Malaysia's experience in ecosystem restoration. So forest protection, mangrove forest protection have been going on in Malaysia since early 20th century, right? But then it was done for forestry activities, for forest products and whatnot. But at the same time, as I highlighted in my presentation, by protecting mangroves, although for sustainable forest production, it actually at the same time protect the area intact. But then for restoration per se, what we can learn from that is foresters know how to let the clear-cut area to be naturally recruited and grown by seedlings, but they will assist by planting mangrove after 2 years of clear felling. So these techniques are being used by foresters in doing forest restoration also. But then with little knowledge of species diversity, the ecology of the targeted restored area. So this is where in 2005, after the tsunami, the Malaysian government formed a national committee to basically replant mangrove and forested and coastal forests throughout the country. But then again, like I mentioned earlier also, it is perceived as planting is the only way to do it. Yeah? But then they also target forest reserves, yeah, to be planted because of the land tenure issues. Yeah? It is hard to target, for example, private lands, because it can be very risky. After planting, the area may be developed. But then again, we need commitment, from landowners, from coastal communities, to be part of this, because this will impact all, basically, all coastal communities and the whole country in general. So and then throughout the 15 years of the committee, they have achieved a lot of success by on invention of techniques to plant, for example, right? So, and then to ensure it's a learning curve, actually. So throughout the 15 years, we learn on which areas should be planted, which area cannot be planted. Of course, there were a series of failures, but then we learn from the mistakes. So I think at this stage, we have basically good knowledge and understanding on doing things right, and it is a continuous work. From the success, from the failures, we learn to do things better. And of course, this contributes also to further strengthening the law to protect coastal mangrove ecosystem, and in general, it contributes also to protection of biodiversity and nature resources in Malaysia. So new policies, new guidelines are being addressed, and this also can be shared, can be learned by all our colleagues in Southeast Asia. One thing different with Indonesia and maybe Philippines in this case, Malaysia is somehow lucky. We are out of this Pacific ring of fire, so we don't have direct earthquake or super strong typhoon like Haiyan targeted, but maybe Sabah in Malaysia part in the Borneo, yes, could be directly impacted as well. And Sabah apparently has the largest number or extent of mangrove in Malaysia. So yeah, we actually are impacted, and we ourselves are learning from our friends from within the region and elsewhere in the tropics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aldri, for the answer. And now the third question is from Ms. Susan Pudin. The third question is addressed to Dr. Yaya. Is the Monmang app a crowdsourcing concept? Can be accessed by the public or only selected group? To Dr. Yaya, time is yours to answer the question.
Right, thank you. The question is, the Monmang app crowdsourcing concepts? Well, actually, at the moment, it's not, because this project is financed by government money, which is actually, if it is from government, we can share it for public. So actually, even though it is not a crowdsourcing concept, the app can be used by everyone. That's free for public. You can download it, install, and have a try. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Raya, for the answer. And we open now the second section. From all of you who join us on Zoom application, can ask the question from the raise hand feature. Still no question from the raise hand feature. And the next question is also from the Q&A column. From the fourth question is for Dr. Aldri. Fantastic presentation as always. How is the current condition of the mangrove in the Klang River related to plastic or inorganic litter reduction and ecotourism development there? To Dr. Adri, time is yours to answer the question.
Oh, thank you very much. I knew that picture will attract attention of the participants. But yes, that area it was actually a private area, a state government's land, and they were planning to actually rehabilitate, or maybe have a minimal development there to attract, to turn that mangrove patch into a tourism attraction. So I haven't visited the area in the last 6-7 months due to this coronavirus pandemic, but it is underway. The area, I mean, I heard the last plan was to build boardwalks. So I'm pretty sure the state government is tackling the marine debris issue also. So as we all know, they may not, this litter may not be directly thrown into the mangroves directly, right? It comes, it may come from both sides, the rivers, from upstream. It may also be transboundary debris coming from the ocean, right? So to tackle marine debris issue, we need to work collaboratively with the authorities that in charge of river management, for example, right? And the local council that manage waste. So it has to be, so in this case, it is I reckon it's the role of the state government to coordinate the management of this waste issue. So to protect the mangrove from being dumped or being overwhelmed by this rubbish or marine debris or litter, they need to also manage waste in the water system, waterways, in the rivers and ocean. So I hope this pandemic will be gone soon to visit this particular site, and but I'm pretty sure measures are being taken by the state government because they want to attract tourists to this area. So we would expect these to be tackled, right? So don't worry, it is not. By the way, it is state government's land, and they are working hard also because they know the potential of mangroves for bringing in tourists. And prior to this pandemic, we established, the government established that nature tourism, particularly mangrove tourism, is the second largest source of economic income for the country. So we're pushing for minimal development in mangrove area, and we're pushing for nature tourism, be it ecotourism, be it geotourism, be it educational tourism. So with minimal interference, and then with the support of local communities as well, local tour guides, local communities with their products, providing accommodation, and also participation by public and private institutions like hotels, homestays. It will contribute holistically to this effort. If I may, I would also like to add a little bit on the first question earlier. Of course, a local community can be directly commit to mangrove restoration. But then also I would like to address, there are also communities that actually proactively began the restoration activities because before or prior to the tsunami event, because they know of the importance of mangrove. So there are some examples throughout Malaysia. I can highlight some communities in Penang, for example. They have been restoring and planting and protecting their mangroves even before the government's effort on through the national committee. So these can be highlighted as one success stories also. And we have communities in Sabah and Sarawak also that depend their life from the mangroves. So they protect it. They are actually the savior or defender, stopping mangrove encroachment. And one thing important about communities is they are the eyes and ears for the government. So we must involve communities because they are the direct beneficiaries, direct stakeholders that depend on mangroves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aldri. for the answer. And the second question from the second session is from Dezel Labapis. The second question is addressed to Dr. Sef, I mean. Thank you, Dr. Sef, for an informative presentation. What can be the role of the LGUs, civil society, and local community in enhancing conservation and proactive restoration? What policy and implementation mechanism must be in place to have a successful restoration and conservation? To Dr. Saif, time is yours. Sorry, Dr. Saif.
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
I muted myself. That's a very tricky question. I've been into mangrove research and management for, I think I'm on my 25th year now. I've seen a lot of local initiatives from the ground. They do work with relative success. And in fact, I appreciate it a lot when communities on the ground protect their mangroves. When they do restore their mangroves, those are fantastic initiatives. However, I have difficulties on, and it's very hard to reconcile. At one side, you have conservation and restoration programs, however little the scale it is. On the other side is the call for a massive development. And of course, I cannot cite my own case here, but there are several things that makes mangroves conducive for reclamation. Maybe for an airport, maybe for a mall, maybe for a tourism facility or something else. Policy-wise, I think I'll go back to my answer before this question. The policies are there, the direction is there, but the call for a massive development is too tempting for the people to ignore. In short, I don't have a straightforward answer, Dassel. In fact, I have my own confusions. After all that we have done for 20, 25 years, and we're still here. But well, the optimistic side is that we are still here. But I have my own questions in my head. How can we move forward? Oh, sorry, Dassel, I don't have a straightforward answer. I hope you didn't see my frustration here.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sef, for the answer. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, because the limited of time, we close this discussion section. And now I would like to give Mrs. Frida Sidi to share the conclusion of this webinar. So Mrs. Frida, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ulan. Finally, we come to the end, and I would like to wrap up by giving some highlights of the webinar. So first, we got the updates of the status of mangrove in South Asia, and then also the recent studies that's showing that the trend of the reduction of the mangrove loss, because which is a very good news for us. And the main driver of the loss is mostly land use change, and about 38% is about the natural drivers, including the climate change, which are typhoon, extreme weather, and maybe sea level rise. And also we have the lesson learned from the speakers that the natural restoration without plantation can run well. And so we need to understand the normal ecology by monitoring the recovery, regeneration cycle, and environmental dynamics. Also, we have some information, how tools and guides and approach are required to support mangrove management and restoration. For example, the mangrove health monitoring. And science, technology are also helpful to address issues such as how much mangrove we have now, and then what's the causing of mangrove loss. And overall, in summary, I picked up the golden words from the webinar, that the quality of we have, which are the healthy mangrove, and always be optimistic for our mangrove. Thank you for the audience, for the speakers, and for people who watching us today.
Thank you, Mrs. Frida, from the conclusion. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of this webinar. But don't leave this webinar yet, because our team will share the link of material and e-certificate. For your information, the link of the electronic certificate only open for 15 minutes. And we will share the certificate at least 2 weeks after this webinar ends. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this webinar and thank you for your attention. Thank you for all speakers, Dr. Aldri, Dr. Yaya, Dr. Dan, and Dr. Seth. Thank you for all the audience, speakers, and all the participants. Have you a very good afternoon. See you in the next webinar. Me, Komangulan, and team sign out. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om. Terima kasih Pak Teja. Masih itu on di kamera.
Saf, thank you for your time today. I'm very appreciate. Hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us. Hi Yaya, hi Dan, hi Seth.
No,
Thank you all.
Frida,
We are no
Frida,
longer live, right? We are no longer live.
Maybe still
no,
still live.
just a quick note. While we are all still here, I really hope that we can revive the One ASEAN program, and it will be evaluated, I think, 2030. I don't know. I have we have issues here. I know Jakarta Bay has issues. There are developmental projects that are threatening the mangroves. And maybe if we will come up as One ASEAN, maybe that could be something that will be more powerful. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Idea. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all.
We are okay. So thank you again for the invite.
Yeah. Hope you enjoy the webinar. Thank you for your time presentation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adi.
See you all soon.
Dan. See you again, Dan.
Bye Dan. Bye Seth. Bye Yaya.
Bye, Seth. Bye. Thank you.